Good afternoon, students. This is Professor Mansinghani, and I wanted to create a short little video here to give you a somewhat better understanding of the Electoral College. So I hope this video works and that it helps you answer the questions that we're looking at here in our course. So let me go ahead and get this started here. Alright, so the Electoral College, you might know by now, is a system that we have in this country by which we choose our president and vice president. It's the official method that is used to choose our president and vice president. And if you'll take a look over here, here are a list of questions that, especially the first two, that we'll be answering in this video. What is the Electoral College and how does it work? It's a path to the White House. It's how somebody becomes president. And one of the questions I want to answer in this video is going to be, how does our vote, for president affect who actually becomes president? This is obviously George W. Bush, and the question many Americans might often have or wonder is, does my vote even count? And yes, it does, as a matter of fact, but perhaps not in the way that we think it does. Because one of the interesting things about the way we choose the president in the United States is that we don't have just one major contest, and that's what causes a lot of misunderstanding and controversy, is that we think that there's one contest going on for the president nationwide, but really what's actually happening is that there are 50 different contests happening throughout the nation in all the various 50 states, and that's what really determines whether you become president or not. So let's start with the basics here. The Electoral College, as I said a few times now, it's the group of people, electors, who are selected by the people in each state. Every state has a different way of choosing these folks, and their job is to officially choose the president and the vice president of the United States. But we'll soon learn how this works. Now, the first question is going to be, well, why didn't they just have an old-fashioned vote, as is often the case in a democracy? In other words, let's just all vote, and then let's just go ahead and count the vote and see who wins. And the reason they didn't do this is because, truth be told, the founding fathers, the framers of our Constitution, the men who wrote our Constitution, men like James Madison and Alexander Hamilton and others, truth is that I don't think they truly trusted the people enough to allow them to directly choose the president. In fact, there was consensus at the convention about whether or not we should choose or allow the people to directly choose their president. There was consensus that it was too complicated of an investigation to be left to the people, that indeed the people could not be trusted to do this. And if you think about it, there was a lot less dissemination of information in those days. In other words, today it's so much easier to come upon information through the internet and through television and through various other journals and articles. But in those times, I think information was a little bit more hard to come by, depending on where you lived, of course. It might have been more of a problem. And so the founding fathers, the framers who put together our Constitution, simply didn't trust the folks. And there were other reasons as well as to why the Electoral College was put together. They were trying to sort of balance the interests of large and small states, and even this issue of slavery came up as well, with southern states having so many slaves, and a number of other factors came up. But like I said, ultimately I think that the big factor here was that they simply didn't trust the folks to make a decision. So how does this work? Well, when we vote for president, right, go ahead and take a look at a ballot here. Let's take a look at a 2016 ballot for president. So we've got one here. For President of the United States, vote for one. Donald J. Trump for president and Michael Pence for vice president, or Hillary Clinton and Tim Kaine as a Democratic ticket, and other candidates as well. So when you actually vote for one of these candidates, let's just say, you're actually voting for another group of people who, if they make it to the Electoral College, they'll choose that person for you. So if you vote for Hillary Clinton, let's say in Texas, you're voting for an X amount of people, a certain group of people, and we'll talk about how many, who will then swear to choose Hillary if they make it to the college. So the real question becomes, who gets to make it to the college? The electors that represent or promise to vote for Trump, or the electors who promise to vote for Hillary? And again, these are separate in every state. Let's go back to this slide that we were looking at here so that we can get into this a little bit better. Now, these electors are chosen in each of their own states, and it varies from state to state, so we don't necessarily have to get into that part today in terms of how these electors are chosen. Suffice it to say that they're chosen by their political parties. In other words, Democrats have their electors, Republicans have their electors, and this may be true for third parties as well. Now, the question really becomes, how many electoral votes does the state get? And that varies. And if you're thinking it varies based on population, that is partially true. Because the number of electors that a state will receive is based upon how many representatives and how many senators a state has. And all states have 2 senators, regardless of their size, right? All states are going to have 2 senators regardless of their size. But the number of representatives that each state has is going to vary based on that state's population. So here's a question for you. Which state do you think is going to have more representatives? The state of California, or let's say the state of Rhode Island? Well, if you guessed California, obviously, you're correct. Let's take a look at how many each of these states have. Now, what did I tell you a moment ago? Each state has as many electoral votes as it has senators and representatives. And the number of senators, once again, is what? 2. So let's take a look at a map, and we'll come back to where we were in just a moment. Here we are. You can see that the state of Texas has 38 electoral votes. So this is a map indicating how many electoral votes the state has. So remember, a state has as many electoral votes as it has senators and representatives. So obviously each state is going to have 2 senators. And so if you look at Texas, just by looking at this number of electoral votes, we can tell that the state has 36 representatives. How? Because we know it has 36 representatives and it has 2 senators like every other state, which adds up to 38. So with that figure alone, we're able to go backwards and figure out how many senators and representatives a state has once we've determined how many electoral votes a state has. And you can see on this map how many each state has. To the question we were looking at earlier, you can see that California has 55 electoral votes. So that means it has 53 representatives and 2 senators. Rhode Island has 2 senators and how many representatives? If you said 2, then you're right, because 2 senators plus 2 representatives is going to equal to 4 electoral votes. Now, the minimum number of representatives that any state can have is 1. Every single state is guaranteed 1 representative. If its population is significant, it will have more. But it's at least guaranteed 1. So if you look at these states where there are 3 electoral votes, that should give it away that those states have only 1 representative. Why? Because if you do the math, for example, here in Montana, you always are going to have 2 senators, and in order to have 3 electoral votes, it means that they have 1 representative. Ergo, they have 3 electoral votes. I hope that makes sense. If not, feel free to ask me questions through email, and I'll help you out. Now, let's go back to what we were looking at here. So each state has as many electoral votes as its senators and representatives. So we just took a look at that nationwide. Now, our nation's capital, D.C., Washington, D.C., the District of Columbia, it actually belongs to no state. So as a result, it has no senators and it has no representatives. However, our country, our government has decided that it ought to have some sort of input into presidential elections, and therefore it was awarded 3 electoral votes, which is, as you should know by now, the minimum number of electoral votes that any state can have. 3. So To know the total number of electoral votes in this country, you would just need to know how many senators we have, which should be easy if every state has 2, which would be 100, and how many representatives we have, and then you would just add the 3 from the District of Columbia. So let's go ahead and see if we can do this together. I'm going to go and do that down here. So we have, let's see, U.S. senators, oops. We have a total of 435 representatives. All right, I'm going to go ahead and put that over here. We have a total of 435 representatives. We have a total of how many senators? 100. And we said the District of Columbia has how many electoral votes? Plus 3 from the District of Columbia. So that gives us a total of how many electoral votes in this country? 538 electoral votes in total. All right. And again, we're going to move through this and figure out how to become president. But let's just talk a little bit more about how many electoral votes each state gets. As you know, it's based on how many representatives and senators that state has, right? That's the simple formula there. How many senators and representatives that a state has. But that number can actually change. Look, we're always going to have 435 representatives. We're always going to have 100 senators, as long as we have 50 states. However, the number that each state has in terms of representatives can go up and down. Take a look at this. In 2008, Texas had a total of 2 senators, as it always will, but it only had 32 representatives. And so that equaled out to 34 electoral votes. But guess what? Every 10 years, the United States government decides to reapportion, reallocate the 435 representatives into the various 50 states based on those states' population. So again, the number 435 will always remain the same unless we gain a new state. But the number that each state receives does change, or rather can change, every 10 years through the process known as reapportionment. Every 10 years, the United States conducts what's called the census, where our population is assessed, and some states' population changes, where some states may go down in population or experience very little growth. Others may experience significant growth. If a population of a state grows significantly in that 10-year span, do you think the number of representatives it receives may go up? If you think yes, then you're right. Look at this. In 2010, or I should say after the census that was conducted in 2010, when the 435 representatives that I discussed earlier were reapportioned based on the number of states that we have, Texas actually gained how many representatives? Because we had 32 and now we have 36. We gained 4 representatives. Why do you think we gained so many representatives? Because look at that, our population increased. In fact, our population in Texas from 2000 to 2010 increased by over 4 million people, nearly 4.5 million. And more than half of those were Hispanic. And so the number of representatives that we received increased from 32 to 36, which is a net gain of 4 representatives. Now, does this affect the number of electoral votes that we have now? Yes. Because remember, the number of electoral votes that a state has is based on the number of senators and representatives that it has. So if we have more representatives, then we have more electoral votes now. And so we went from 34 electoral votes to 38 electoral votes. And I have a question for you. Do you remember that I earlier said that this number, the number of representatives, does not change overall? Just the number that each state receives can change? So if Texas gained 4 representatives, and this full number of representatives didn't change, what do you think had to have happened somewhere else in this country, in another state? If you guessed that another state probably lost, then you're right. Because look, the map that I was showing you earlier, that shows you how many electoral votes each state has also shows you what changes came. The ones in gray did not change. They didn't lose representatives or gain any. Those in blue gained representatives. Texas being the state in the union that gained the most. We were the only state that gained 4. But you can see we weren't the only state to gain any representatives. You can actually see the changes here, where Florida had 27 electoral votes. It now has 29 electoral votes. So they gained 2 representatives. Another state that gained is Arizona. Let me go back here. Arizona gained 1 representative, as you can see. But look at the ones in orange. States like New York and Pennsylvania and New Jersey. These states actually lost representatives. Look at that. New York had 31 and it went down to 29. So that's interesting. So let's go back to where we were, okay? So I just wanted to show you how the number of electoral votes, not only how it works, but how it can change every 10 years. And I hope that gives you a somewhat better understanding of how that process works. And again, like I said earlier, if that doesn't make sense, please feel free to write down questions and email me or let me know in person. All right, so let's move on then. So consider Texas. It has 38 electoral votes. Does anybody remember what the total number of electors are again? It's up there, isn't it? 538. Let's talk about how many of those you need to become President of the United States. All right, so what's the total number of electoral votes again? 538. In order to become president, you need a majority of these. Who knows what a majority means? It means you need more than half. So what's half of 538? 269 is the answer. But is that more than half? No, that's just half. So you would add 1 more, and you would equal up to the magic number. To become president, you need 270 electoral votes. Thus, you need 270 electoral votes to become president of the United States. So the question on your mind should be, how do you get those electoral votes? If Texas has a total of 38 electoral votes, how does a candidate get those electoral votes? Well, guess what? It comes to you and I, the people. Remember I showed you earlier a ballot? Guess what? So let's say in Texas, everyone goes out and votes. Millions of people go out and vote. And they choose between Donald Trump for president and Hillary Clinton for president, or the third party candidate, Gary Johnson. Well, guess what? We go out and we count every single one of those votes because those votes do matter. We count every single one of those votes here in Texas. And then based on how many each candidate receives, that will dictate who gets the state's electoral votes. Look, check this out. If you look over here on my next slide, you can see that the candidate who receives the most votes, this means plurality, not more than half, just the most, it could be by more than 1, in a state will receive all of that state's electoral votes. This is what we call a winner-takes-all system. And this is how 48 states, with the exception of Maine and Nebraska, work. And what this means is, like I said earlier, we go out and we count every single one of these ballots, and whoever receives more votes, well, guess what? Get all of the 38 electoral votes. So let's see how Texas voted in 2016, okay? So 2016 presidential election, all right? Let's go ahead and take a look at the way Texas voted. So we're gonna look at this map. Here we go, here's Texas. And you can see that here's a popular vote. On the left, we have 4.6 million voted for Donald Trump, and you have 3.8 million who voted for Hillary Clinton. So we actually counted every single ballot. Every time somebody bubbled in, put it into that ballot box, we counted it. And who got more votes? As you see here in Texas, 52% of the vote went to Donald Trump. Now, Hillary Clinton got 43% of the vote. That means in Texas, nearly 3.9 million people voted for her. But will she get anything from this state? Will she receive any of the state's electoral votes? Nope. Because what did I say a moment ago? Texas is one of the 48 states that is a winner-takes-all system. What does that mean? Whoever wins the popular vote in Texas, like that, will receive all of this state's electoral votes. So that means what? Because Trump won Texas, because the people of Texas chose Trump, or more of the people in Texas voted for Trump, Trump gets all 38 electoral votes from Texas. It's not enough to become president because he still needs 270. Let me give you a similar example. Let's take California and its big 55 electoral votes because of its major population there. Let's see how that turned out. Frickin' old President Trump. So here's 55. This is the state of California. And you can see that 8.7 million voted for Clinton. That means they counted the ballots in California. And ultimately, she got 8.7 million and he got 4.4. And guess what? California, as you should know, hopefully, is one of the winner-takes-all states. And so whoever the people choose in that state, whoever the people vote for, then that candidate will receive all of that state's electoral votes. So back to this, you can see that while these may have gone to Trump, who's the Republican candidate, in California, the 55 electoral votes went to Clinton, who is, of course, the Democrat, right? Because winner takes all. And again, how many to become president? Whoever reaches the 270 figure will become president. And this is how these races continue. In Maine and Nebraska, it's a little bit more proportional. What did I tell you earlier? Well, just like in Texas, where Trump in California received 31% of the vote, he gets 0 electoral votes. He doesn't get anything. In Maine and Nebraska, check it out, it's a little bit different. The candidate who wins the district, let me explain to you what that means. Maine and Nebraska, let's see how many electoral votes they have. Let's take a look here. So I have that map over here. Maine has, as you can see up over here, folks, 4 electoral votes. 4 electoral votes. Nebraska, as you can see over here, has 5 electoral votes. Nebraska has a total of 5 electoral votes. So that means that the state of Nebraska has 3 representatives and 2 senators. All right? And Maine has 2 representatives and 2 senators. I hope that that part makes sense. And that being the case, this means that Nebraska is going to have 3 districts. That means the state is going to be broken up into 3 parts so that they can choose 3 representatives, right? So the number of districts a state has, in this case, is equal to the number of representatives that a state has. And the same is true for Maine. Maine would have 2 districts because it has 2 representatives. So let me go back to what I was trying to explain over here. The candidate who wins that particular district will receive that district's electoral vote. So in Nebraska, as you noticed, there were going to be 3 districts. So whoever wins that particular area will get that particular electoral vote. And then whoever wins the overall contest, in other words, whoever wins in that state altogether, will receive the extra 2 electoral votes that the state has because it has 2 senators. So they try to make it a little bit more proportional, meaning that the amount of electoral votes that you receive is a little bit more proportional to how much of the vote you received, in other words. But again, only Maine and Nebraska use this system. So honestly, it doesn't make a big difference on the overall picture. Because the large states and all the 48 states, in other words, they use the winner-takes-all system. And that's what we just discussed a moment ago. And again, how many did it take to become president? And you can look down over here for now. In order to win, a candidate needs to receive a majority, which is more than half of the electoral votes, which is going to be 270, the magic number we discussed earlier. So as long as you win the right collection of states, let's look at the last presidential election here that we were looking at a moment ago. Take a look at this. As long as you win the right collection of states to get you that 270 figure, let's look at this over here. You become president of the United States. You don't have to win all of the states. You don't even have to win the popular vote of this country. Why? Because this isn't one major contest. It's how many contests? It's 50 different contests. And as long as you win enough contests to give you 270 or more, which you can see Donald Trump obtained in the year 2016, last year's presidential election, he was able to become president. The popular vote, as you can see, did go to Hillary Clinton. So this means while you can win the popular vote, you may yet lose in the Electoral College because you may have won the right collection of states to give you that 270 figure. And again, why did Donald Trump get 304 electoral votes? Because he won enough contests. People in those states chose him overwhelmingly, or enough at that rate, so that he could win the state's electoral votes. So it isn't that the Electoral College chose him, it's that he won the right collection of states to gain enough electoral votes to have the college choose him. And this is also one of the downfalls of the Electoral College, is that you can win the popular vote in the United States, but yet not become president. And you may win in the Electoral College, but not win the popular vote because of these 50 different contests that are taking place. Let's go back to this slide over here. Oops. Now, just a couple of other things that I wanted to cover. What if nobody gets 270? It's possible. Math is kind of funny, folks. Guess what? The House of Representatives gets to choose among the top 3 vote getters. The House of Representatives gets to choose among the top 3. And this has happened before in our nation's history. And the interesting thing is that the House can choose any of the top 3. It can even choose the one with the least amount of votes, which doesn't sound very democratic, does it? And it isn't. And this happened to Andrew Jackson. When in that election, he actually received, in the election of 1824, he actually received more votes. But he didn't get a majority, which was a different figure back then. There were less states. He didn't get a majority, and so it went to the House of Representatives, and they chose John Quincy Adams, the son of former President John Adams. And if no candidate for vice president gets a majority, because they vote for these two separately, then the United States Senate chooses who the next vice president will be, with each senator voting once. And what did I say a little while ago? Even though you win the popular vote of this country, it does not mean you'll become president, because the actual contest is divided amongst the 50 states. You have to win enough of them to reach 270. And as you can see here, this has happened 5 times in U.S. history. We already saw what happened last year with Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. But you can also see here that it's happened 4 other times. And one of the most notable times that this occurred was in the election of 2000. That was a very noticeable one. And let me tell you why. That one was really, really something else. I think last year's one was as well, but I do think that the 2000 election was pretty damn close. Let me show you what happened in that election, which I think you'll find interesting. So let's go back over here. We're going to look at the presidential election of 2000. Let's go back a couple of years. Anybody know who ran in this race? It was Al Gore versus George W. Bush. Here you are. Now, take a look at this. We know from history that it is George Bush who became president. Look at that. He had 271 electoral votes. And Al Gore did not become president, and he had 266 electoral votes. Do you see that there? Now, you can see here that Al Gore won the popular vote, but he didn't win the right collection of states. Look. Does anyone know which state it came down to? Which state provided the most controversy? If you guess Florida, you're right. it all came down to Florida. And let me explain to you what I'm referring to here, because I think you'll find this part rather fascinating. So the reason it came down to Florida is, take a look at the math here. Remember, I told you, it all came down to Florida. It was a nail biter. Nobody knew who was going to win Florida. Let's see if I can show you what I'm referring to here, okay? So here's the tally, right? 271, 266. Now you can see from this map that Florida is red, so it went to Bush. But let's try to get to the night of 2000. The point at which we have no idea who was going to win Florida. So let's subtract Florida from the winner so that we know what the election looked like right before Florida. So we have 271 for George W. Bush. So he got Florida ultimately. But before that was, I guess you can say, made official, his tally, his electoral vote count would have been 271 minus 25. So he was at 246. Al Gore stays the same because he didn't win Florida, so his tally is the same. Right before we figured out what was going to happen in Florida, the race was 246 to 266. Do you understand what I'm trying to say here? If you remove Florida from anybody, this goes down, Bush's tally goes down to 246, and Gore's stays at 266 because, this was never given to him in the first place. So our new tally becomes what? 246 for Bush and 266 for Al Gore. So at that point, at that moment in the night, Al Gore is ahead. But it all comes down to Florida, doesn't it? Because if George Bush wins Florida, you can see it brings him up to 271. If Al Gore wins Florida, it'll bring him up to 266 plus 25, gives you 291 electoral votes. So it's all riding on Florida. How do we decide who gets the Floridian vote? Well, don't you remember that Florida is a winner-takes-all system? So what do? The people of Florida, they go out and they vote, right? And whoever receives most votes, the plurality, will receive all of that state's electoral votes. Well, guess what? Look how close Florida was. This one's going to be pretty interesting. Look at this. 2,912,790 for Bush. And Al Gore, 2,912,253. You know what this means? This, folks, is a difference of 537 votes. And whoever got those votes would become the president of the United States, because if they got those extra votes in Florida, then they win all. In other words, they receive more votes, and they'll get all of Florida's 25 electoral votes. And so there were several recounts. It was a very close election. There were a lot of discrepancies, a lot of controversies. People felt that their votes weren't being counted. I mean, they were all sorts of issues. You can even see by county and by congressional district here who the electors were. I mean, there was just so much going on in Florida. And there's all this history on the recount as well. You can see here the outcome of who would win Florida wasn't even known until more than a month after the recounting and the official counting, and then the recounting of the ballots. So people were waiting to find out who would become president for over a month after the election had come to an end. It was just difficult. And this thing went on, and it even reached the Supreme Court of the United States because there was, I guess you could say, controversy over the recount and over who those votes should go to, and which recount should be counted or chosen or used, because one recount said it was Al Gore, and another recount said it was George Bush. And remember, whoever won would get the 25 electoral votes and would become president. And ultimately, the Supreme Court ruled in such a way that George Bush was able to get those extra 537 votes he needed, and thus became president of the United States, because he was able to secure, through the winner-takes-all system, all 25 electoral votes, as you can see from Florida and thus became president, even though nationwide he had not received most of the votes. So that was a really close election, and a very contested election as well. What are some of the criticisms of the Electoral College? Well, let me tell you a little bit about the criticisms, and I guess even the advantages. Here is the map of the 2016 election again, right? Now, Texas. You can see there was a couple of issues there where electors didn't vote the way they were supposed to, even though they're supposed to vote the way they're supposed to. Those are called faithless electors. They've never really made a difference in any election, and so we don't worry too much about that just yet. But you can see that Texas was a state that Donald Trump was pretty safe on getting. You can see that he received the electoral votes there, not the 38 that he was supposed to, but he did receive the electoral votes there. Do you think Donald Trump need to come down here and campaign here in Texas that much? Do you think Donald Trump worried that he was going to lose Texas? Probably not, because think about it. If Donald Trump were to come down here and spend millions of dollars campaigning, and he takes his projected lead from 55% to 60%, does it mean he's going to get more electoral votes? Nope. He still gets all of them. Winner takes all, even if he gets one extra vote. So what happens, folks, is that candidates know which states they're probably going to win because they have a tendency to vote certain ways. Like Texas has a tendency to vote Republican. California has a tendency to vote Democrat. And so presidential candidates don't spend that much time in states they know that they're going to win or that they're going to lose. They actually spend more time in states that they don't know which way it's going to go. And those are states that we call the swing states. And swing states include states like Florida, North Carolina. North Carolina is going to be one of the states that's a bit swingish in this regard. Michigan has provided some of that as well. Ohio has been notoriously one of the swing states. And so a lot of presidential candidates will win there because they'll add up the math. Hillary will say, I know I'll get California, so throw 55 on the map for me. And Trump will say, hey, I know I'll win southern states. I'll win Texas, so throw that on the map for me. What's our number now? He says, well, it's 180. Hillary, they'll tell her it's 170. So they say, well, let's look at the swing states. Let's see if we can put our time and our money there so that we can push ourselves over 270 once all of this is counted. So what the Electoral College ends up causing is that these candidates end up spending much more time in the swing states. And some people said, well, why don't we just have a national contest? Why do we just get rid of the Electoral College and and just do a popular vote and let that determine who becomes president? Well, if you were a presidential candidate in that kind of a contest, not 50 different contests, but instead just one nationwide contest, where do you think you'd spend most of your time campaigning? Probably where people live. And where do most people live? In the large cities of Los Angeles, San Francisco, San Antonio, Houston, Dallas, Austin, Chicago, New York City, Miami. And some people fear that the presidential candidates will only focus on the large cities because that's where the real contest would be. And to secure enough large cities, then the election's done, right? They can ignore rural small areas. And they say that's why the Electoral College is good, because it allows these rural areas to be counted more. But again, the question is, does the current system protect rural areas or do more to protect swing states than rural areas? Because there could be rural areas in Texas. Ain't no one coming out there if they know they're going to lose or if they know they're going to win, if you understand what I'm saying. I hope some of this makes sense to you. These are just some of the criticisms and sort of advantages in the system that I want you to be aware of. So you can see here where most of the money in presidential elections is spent. You can see that the swing states, Pennsylvania has also been considered a little bit of a swing state here. A lot of money has been spent here by political candidates. Florida is one of the swing states up here. And so you can see that a lot of people don't spend money in the states they know they're going to win or lose. right? Hillary and Obama and those candidates, for example. So I hope this helped you better understand how the Electoral College works. I don't expect this to be a video that answers every single question, but I do hope that it does, again, provide you with some understanding of the system. And I encourage you to ask any questions that you might have. And I hope I did more to help you than to confuse you. Good luck and best wishes, folks.